Hi everyone, it's John from RFM Calc, and today I'm talking about Shopware. So Shopware is an established e-commerce platform launched by two brothers, Stefan and Sebastian Harman, in Germany in 2000, so well over 20 years ago. The current version is Shopware 6, so it's been through a few iterations, obviously, in that time since it launched. And if we look at the pricing under, where's it gone? Product pricing. We can see there's three core versions. There's actually four because there's an advanced version that sits in between starter and professional. But on this page, we can see starter, professional, and enterprise. So you can see there's different functionality and obviously different pricing levels there. Enterprise being quite expensive and really up against some of the enterprise competitors in the e-commerce platform space. Some of these options are cloud hosted, so the free and the professional. Advanced is as well, the option you can't see. But then there's self-hosted options as well for professional, and enterprise is only available as self-hosted. And there is also a community edition, which is open source. So in terms of kind of the offerings, it's actually quite similar to Magento in that respect, which also has obviously the open source offering that's been around for many years, and then the paid offering, which is available on a cloud basis as well. I would say the main difference is Magento doesn't have this kind of starter point offering at that kind of lower end of the market, where Shopware does. So they're obviously going after a bit of that business as well and competing more against those kind of cheaper platforms rather than just the kind of professional and enterprise level, which Magento really targets. Like Magento, it's PHP based, so PHP MySQL, the open source version. So very, very similar, really, in terms of that fundamental technology. Although, as I say, the offering's slightly different to Magento. Obviously, it's been around, like I say, a long time. And according to builtwith.com, there's currently around 50,000 stores powered by Shopware. So Builtwith can underreport a little, so I'd expect the number to be a bit higher than that. So either way, that's still obviously a lot less than Magento, but it's still a significant amount. And of course, like all good e-commerce platforms, it integrates with RFM Calc. So you can integrate with our platform, no problem, and generate all the advanced reports around lifetime value, average time between order, customer cohort analysis, obviously RFM segmentation as well. So that's no problem, and we'll talk about that today on this video. And you can see as well, it's quite a nice site, I would say. It's quite slick, and you can see there's obviously major brands using the platform, and there's a lot of actually really good documentation and information on the site in terms of how Shopware works. So it's very thorough, and it seems, certainly from the outset, and just looking at the site, to be a thoroughly decent platform. It's not a platform I've used before, to be honest. I had heard of it in the past. I've never actually used it. So obviously during this process, I've set up a demo store, which is kind of interesting. So an interesting learning experience for me. But it seems like certainly a solid and respected platform. So today we're going to talk through that platform. So I'm going to do a brief demo of the admin. I'm then going to show you how to export orders from Shopware as a CSV file, which is possible. We'll then take a deep dive into that CSV file to understand the architecture of the file and how the data is structured. And then finally, I'll show you how to upload that file into RFM Calc and generate a Shopware project so that you can then generate all the reports you need from RFM Calc with your Shopware data. So to start with, let's have a look at the demo store I've set up. So this is the Shopware admin dashboard. So I'm on the obviously cloud hosted version. So you can see when you log in, you've got some videos, guidance here. You've got this kind of checklist of things you have to do to actually push your site live. So I did all of these. So I went through, made sure all of this was set up. The problem is when you click go live, even if you go on the free plan, you still have to give your payment details, which I wasn't particularly keen to do, just for the purposes of this demo. So you can see the reason for that is, even though it's $0 a month, that there's a revenue share for all purchases. But I think the fact you have to, connect up your payment details even for the free plan is a little bit, it's not really a free plan if you have to give payment details, I think. But that's fine. And obviously you've got options to choose your plan. You've got this kind of free trial, runs for 14 days, I think it is. So in terms of the different options, if I just expand the menu here, so you can see you've got catalog, orders, customers, content, themes, marketing, extensions, settings. So kind of nice and logical, clean layout really, in terms of the navigation options available. So if I start with products, I've set up a few products here. So it was relatively straightforward, I would say, to add a product. you can see basically when you add the product, you've got the key fields here in terms of name, SKU and so on, pricing. You can add images down at the bottom, and then once you save the product, you then get additional options across the top to add more variants and so on. So if I go back to my products here, so for this Dice t-shirts here, these are obviously the options you get once you've saved it. So you've got specifications, advanced pricing. Variants is interesting, so it's not massively complicated to set up variants. It is more difficult than certain other platforms which allow you to basically do it all from one screen instantly. What happens here is that you have to, if I just go to another product like this banana that doesn't have variants, so you can see you start variant generator, but you have to excuse me, have a variant pre-set up here. You can't create one from this screen, and to do that you have to go into catalogs properties, it's called, and then you can add a property. So you can see I've created this size option here, but you can't create those directly from the product page. So that's normal. I think Magento works in a similar way, but more modern e-commerce platforms do kind of let you do that all at the same time and just make that process a little bit smoother, which Shopware doesn't. But it is relatively easy, and you've got similar types to Magento in terms of text drop down. Not as many, but you can add your property values there. So that's what I did. You can see there are some little quirks. So if I go to the variant list for the Dice t-shirt, even though I set the order here to run small, medium, large than massive, or mahusive as I put it there, when it shows them on the admin, it doesn't respect that order. So that's just a little, let me just go to size here and I'll show you this. So you can see I've got the position, small, medium, large, mahusive should be last in position 4, but on the product screen, it's not. So it's things like that that just show a little bit of a lack of attention to detail, because obviously when you're working through this now, adding the pricing, what I did first was I just went through adding £5 each time to the different sizes, but obviously got it wrong because I didn't see it, hadn't put them in the order I'd specified. So on the front end it does, and so it obeys that on the front end, but it's just kind of a little indicator really into something that's not quite as thought about as it should have been, that the attributes don't show in the order you specify on the admin panel. So that's just something to be aware of. And you've then got things like layout, SEO, so you can change the meta title, the description and so on. You can add cross-selling to link products as well. So it's all the kind of standard stuff. So it's pretty straightforward. I would say it's pretty well laid out. There's just, like I say, little parts of it that just don't work quite as well as they could. Which obviously after 20 years and kind of 6 versions you'd expect them to. So that was a slightly disappointing, I would say. But you know, it works, and it's pretty straightforward to add products. And then I'll then just touch on categories. So I created a new category here called Top Stuff. So you can see, you know, again, pretty basic settings in terms of the content that goes on the site and the category type. You've then got the products here. One thing I couldn't figure out how to do is change the order of the products within the category. So there doesn't seem to be a way you could remove the association here. But what you normally have here for a lot of platforms is kind of a drag and drop interface. So you can see all the products within the category, and then you can kind of drag them around. Because merchandising is really important in e-commerce. You obviously want your best products at the top, or best/newest, however you want to structure it. But you know, you need that option to be able to merchandise a category. And Shopware doesn't seem to have that. It could be somewhere else, and I've just missed it. I think even when I looked on products, I couldn't actually see it. Here how to merchandise either. So that's a bit disappointing. That's kind of a core option again. After so many versions, you'd expect that to be part of it, but that's not quite there. So yeah, I think what I would say is the product setup is relatively straightforward, but it does lack a few key features, I would say, that I was expecting to see. Just to show you the products on the front end as well, so you can see you've got the functionality here where it does kind of change the price. It kind of reloads the product page with the correct variants. And you can see, just to demonstrate what I was saying before, on the front end, the sizes are in the correct order that I've specified on the admin. It's just on the admin side they're not, which is, I think, a little bit of an oversight. But yeah, fundamentally, catalogs, products, that all works pretty well. Like I say, just a few little tweaks I would make to improve it, and a little bit surprised that certain functionality isn't there that I would have expected. So orders I'll come back to last. Customers, you've got basically a list of customers here. You can see, again, they're all listed here. So some of these, or one of them, I created an account. The rest were all guest customers. But you can see even when you click on a guest customer, you've still got basically information there for them and the address and so on. So they're still logged effectively, in that standard customer group, even though they're a guest. So that's something to bear in mind. So a lot of platforms, if a customer checks out as a guest, they won't actually create a customer record, whereas Shopware does, which is fine. They're not the only platform to do that, and you can kind of understand why. Themes, I'll just touch on next. So there are kind of themes that you can add to Shopware. So by default, it just comes with this default one. I've created a duplicate of that, which basically allows you not to change a massive amount, but kind of the primary colors, the logo and so on. So there's not actually a huge amount. It's quite a way behind kind of the advanced editors of a lot of e-commerce platforms in terms of what you can do through the theme. You can, though, then go to content, and Shopware calls them shopping experiences, to change the layout of key pages. So I've created this duplicate here for the product page. And if I go in, what I can do, if I go to the sections, if I go to the blocks, and then where am I going? There we go. If I go to the layout, so the icons aren't necessarily super clear, but you can do things like, if you want it to be wild and move the product heading to the bottom of the page, you can do that. So then the product heading is all the way down here. So you can kind of move things around. You can customize the elements. So even though this isn't part of the themes section, it still gives you quite a lot of flexibility in terms of customizing the layout of key pages. So you can see you've got the product page, you've got the category pages as well over here. So there's a fair bit you can do, I would say, to move the blocks around. It's not massively customizable, I think, through the admin, and that's, to be expected. Obviously, to make any serious changes, you're going to need to create a theme and go through the code. But there's, a fair bit you can do here. We've then got, obviously, the themes I talked about. You've got marketing, very basic marketing options. So you've got a list of people who subscribe to your newsletter and a promotion engine as well, so you can create discount codes and so on. There's then an extension marketplace. So there's a few things here. So there's a decent amount of kind of customized extensions that you can install. So similar to kind of WooCommerce plugins or Shopify apps as well. There's a fair number of systems that integrate and have apps for Shopware, so that's good. And that those are available, so you can add those there. Obviously, some of them are paid, as you'd expect. And then my extensions, you can see I've got nothing installed yet. And then next is the settings. So there's a few options in here as well. What I would say about this section is it's not particularly easy to navigate as a first-time user. I think you can see there's a big list of options here, but they're not really structured into any kind of particular grouping. So whereas on Magento, you'd have headings for all these options and what it relates to, here there's not. So, for example, you've got kind of number ranges, and I'm genuinely no idea what that means until you click on it, and you can see, okay, so that's just for global variables, the kind of range of, for order number, for example, what you want the start and maximum, I guess mainly start number for order number and things like that. But it's not on the settings screen. It's not structured in a way that makes it kind of easy to know what these mean. Salutations is interesting. So by default, just to be aware of, it comes with Mr. and Mrs. out of the box. There's no Miss or Ms either. So just something to bear in mind. Obviously, you can add more, but it's interesting that by default, they only have Mr. and Mrs. As options. You'd think there would be more by default there. Which from experience, some customers might be offended by, so that's just something to bear in mind. So there's quite a few options. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it covers kind of the general setup of the store and configuration. I'll come back to this in a bit, because there is a section of this that I will need. The final one I just wanted to touch on at the moment is payments. So basically, Shopware have their own payment module powered by Molly, I think it is, who I'm not familiar with. But basically, that allows you to have credit cards, Klarna as well, through this one method. There is a separate PayPal integration as well, PayPal being very popular. And then you do have these test kind of cash on delivery and pay in advance options as well, which is really useful for testing. What I would say is, although I've not been able to launch my live store, you can still place test orders on your test store, which is what I've done to generate the orders for this demo today. So that it's good. There's some free options there. That's always good to see, that those payment methods are available to save you actually connecting up a real PayPal account, for example, or signing up for this system here. Cool. So that's a little overview of kind of the functionality available. So there's a few options in there. I would say there's not a massive amount of functionality, quite a lot less than Magento, for example, in terms of what's available, at least on this plan. Presumably other more expensive plans will have more options and more functionality. But it is quite well laid out. It's quite well structured. It's kind of simple. It's not overwhelming. There are definitely a few tweaks I would make, such as the settings page, just to make this a bit more logical and tie similar settings groups together under headings to make it a bit more readable. But overall, it seems a pretty neat platform and pretty solid. So for the next step, let's go to the order screen. Okay, so this is the list of orders, which I've put through as test orders, as I mentioned, on the site. So varying amounts. Some of these have one product, some have multiple products, all obviously different customers. So if you click in an order, you get some information about it in terms of the obviously the customer details, billing address and shipping address, the products they've ordered, and a bit of history as well in terms of the status. You can add documents and things to orders as well. So all the kind of standard stuff, I would say. What's interesting is that when you look at this screen, obviously for RFM Calc, we need to export these orders as a CSV file, and there isn't a CSV option on this screen, which is unusual, I would say, for an e-commerce platform. Most e-commerce platforms would let you export directly from this screen for your order list because it's such a common request, and obviously it's fundamental for RFM Calc in terms of us getting the order data out for you. So there isn't an option here. You can change kind of the columns that are shown and so on, but there's no export option that I could find unless I'm missing it, but it's really well hidden if I am. Fortunately, though, there is a way to do this. So if we go back to settings and then import export, you can actually export the orders here. So if I go to export, what I can do is select a profile. So there's several default profiles that come with Shopware. So all these ones starting with default. So there's default orders here, which is basically what I've used. All I've done is created a duplicate of it, and this is this copy of default orders. The only reason for that is that if I go to default orders here, you can see the delimiter by default is a semicolon. So a couple of kind of older e-commerce platforms do this. 90% of platforms, I would say, export with a comma as this delimiter, which is what you want normally, and that's normally the best way. You could open it straight in Excel. Shopware doesn't. It uses a semicolon, which is fine. So from an RFM Calc point of view, that's absolutely fine. When you create your project, you can specify the delimiter and set it as semicolon, and that will work no problem. The issue is, though, that when you try and open it in Excel, certainly on Windows, Excel won't interpret the CSV properly if it's got a semicolon delimiter. So then you have to go through an import process and so on. It's a bit of a pain. And so rather than do that, all I did was create a copy of default orders, which is exactly the same. So it's got all the same column mappings here, which you can customize as well. So it's quite a powerful system, I should say, this, in terms of you can really customize for your different export profiles the columns you want to include. So that's really good. You can change the order. It's actually a really well thought through system. But what you could also do is change the delimiter. So you can see here I've changed it from semicolon to comma. And that just means when I download it, I don't have to faff around with Excel. It'll just open straight in Excel and we're good to go then. So now that I've got that profile, all I have to do is click export here. I'll go to copy of default orders, start export. And you can see it's processing there. And all I have to do now is wait for a couple of seconds. While it's ticking away. It's only 4 orders, so it shouldn't take too long. He says. Yep, okay, so admittedly this is taking slightly longer than I wanted, but I suppose the good thing about a process like this is that it's clearly kind of doing an internal queue. And what that means is that even if it's a large data set, it should still work. It'll obviously take a while to generate, but you won't be sat here kind of with the server timing out because the order file is too big, which can happen on certain other platforms. So it's good it uses a queue-based system. And like I say, the export overall is really powerful and really well thought through. And there we go, right on cue. You can see here the export was completed successfully. So I just click there, download the file. There you can see a nice CSV file and save the file. And that's as simple as it is to export orders. You'll notice that even though it's very customizable in terms of the column mappings, there weren't any options to kind of filter out particular orders or do a date range. So by default, you're going to get everything, which is fine for RFM Calc, but just something to bear in mind. So now we've got the file successfully. Let's have a look what it looks like. Okay, so this is the file that you get during that export. As I say, I've done this with a comma separated delimiter, but if you do it with a semicolon, it'll still work fine in RFM Calc. It just won't open as easily in Excel. So what I've done with this file is obviously just saved it as an Excel file, just so I can spread the columns out and make it a bit more readable. So the first thing to note is that the file runs oldest to newest. So you've got oldest orders at the top, newest orders at the bottom. So different e-commerce platforms export in different ways. Some run newest to oldest, others run oldest to newest. Either's absolutely fine for RFM Calc. It makes no difference to us. Obviously, the main thing is they're in an order, so that's fine. Just running through the columns, so you've got this kind of internal ID here, and you've then got the order number. The sales channel ID represents the storefront, so that's always the same. You've then got some customer details, so customer first name, last name are separated. You've got the email, which we'll need. You've then got the billing details in terms of address, postcode, city, company, billing address department. I don't know what that relates to, but there's a column there as well. You've then got the internal IDs for kind of country ID and state ID. And then basically all the same fields again for the shipping. So most of these orders, I did the same shipping address as billing address, but it still repeats the information in the shipping address fields, which is useful. And that's how most e-commerce platforms handle it, rather than leaving this blank. If billing address is the same, it's better just to repopulate them just to be safe. So that's there as well. You've then got the order total here, so you don't get a breakdown in terms of subtotal and tax and so on and shipping costs. It's all just in the total in this export, which is fine. Obviously, you can customize the export, I'm sure, to include those values if you need them. You've then got the order state ID, which in terms of, I think this first one was shipped, but then the rest are still processing. So that's in there as well. Again, it's done as an ID rather than the actual text value, so a bit less useful when you're trying to analyze the data. But you can, I'm sure, kind of, again, update the mappings to kind of pull in the actual state name, which is probably more useful from a reporting point of view. You've then got the line items, so all the items that were ordered on that particular order, again as IDs though, so an ID, pipe separated with a quantity. So again, not the most human readable form to export the line items, but you can then obviously cross match that and pull in the data from your products as well if you need to. And then finally, you've got the order date and time. So what I would say is it's pretty basic. It's unusual for an export of orders to kind of use internal IDs normally by default. So for example, in Magento or Shopify or any e-commerce platform, really, it would pull through the actual text data, so the end result of this ID rather than just the internal ID. So that's a little bit of a shame and makes it, from a kind of readability point of view, if you're just downloading this and trying to look, okay, what products has this customer ordered, it's then a much bigger faff to try and work that out, which is a shame. But from an RFM Calc point of view, it does contain all the key information we need. So we've got the order time, we've got the order total, we've got the customer details, we've got the order ID. And so that's everything we need to generate those advanced e-commerce reports for you. So now that we understand the file, let's see how we can upload it to RFM Calc. Okay, so I've got my RFM Calc account open here. So all I need to do is create a new project, which we'll call Test Shopware. So the default project currency is GBP. That's fine. That's how I set up my Shopware store. For the date column interpretation, so the default is fine. You can see here, it's kind of clear it's in the US format, but our system will interpret that fine. So that will interpret as the 9th of February, not the 2nd of September, because the year's first. So that's absolutely fine to leave that. The date ordering, as I mentioned, orders run oldest to newest in the Shopware export, but the auto detect is fine. And then for the delimiter, so as I mentioned, the version I downloaded uses a comma for a delimiter, but if you have downloaded the semicolon option delimited, which is the default in Shopware, you can just change that there and that will work no problem at all. And that's kind of as simple as it is really for the project, I should say, setup. So there we go. I can now go into that project and schedule a report. So what I'm going to do is upload the raw CSV file, so the unedited version, not the slightly edited Excel version I showed you with the columns spread out a bit, but it's exactly the same data as we've been looking at. Okay, now for order ID, you've got a couple of options here in terms of what to map. So you could use this internal ID. Order number is fine as well. Order number is kind of a little bit more readable. So we'll probably just stick with that, I think. Order dates is all the way at the end on Shopware, so order date time. Currency code, there isn't one, but that's not essential anyway. For order value, as I mentioned, there's just one column, amount total, which is fine. So I always like to report on the fully inclusive total the customer's paid anyway, so including tax, including shipping. So that works for me. Obviously, if you're used to reporting net, excluding VAT, excluding shipping, and kind of the reports you're using internally, then you might want to alter this export profile to include that. But for me, this is absolutely fine. Order status. Now there is an order status column, as we can see if I just scroll back across here. We've got this, where has it gone? Order state ID. So this is the status of the order. So you can set that. It's not actually needed for RFM Calc. So if I'll just set it here, order state ID. All that allows you to do is exclude certain statuses. So if you knew the internal ID for cancelled, for example, you could then copy and paste that into this status exclusion list. You could have multiple, you just comma separate them. You can just comma separate them, sorry. And that will automatically exclude any cancelled orders from the reporting rather than you having to kind of manually take them out of the CSV first. So it's a really useful feature, but it's just a bit more difficult, I think, to understand with Shopware, just because it's not exporting the status name by default, just the internal ID. So it's a bit more difficult to get your head around, but it will still work as expected if you put a state ID in to the exclusion list. Now for customer ID, there isn't an internal customer ID exported with this, even though every customer essentially has one on Shopware. You can see on the customer list that I showed previously, they all have kind of a record, even if they don't actually create an account and check out as a guest. But what we normally recommend anyway is to use the email address as the identifier, because what I'm not sure about is if a customer comes back with the same email, if Shopware will collate them into the same customer ID or if it will create a new record. So email's normally the safest option anyway, even if you have an internal ID to use for that. Obviously, there's no customer phone column. We do have first name and last name though, so I'll put customer first name and last name in. Just to say these... and I almost forgot to set customer emails, the ID there. It's email, phone, we don't have first name, last name. All these columns here on essential, so you don't need these for scheduling the report. All this means is that in certain areas of the report we'll pull through customer info, like the customer first name, last name, email, to generate tables. So for example, your top 10 customers or your top 10 customers who haven't purchased in the last 6 months, things like that. So it's useful for that data, but it's not actually essential, and it doesn't change any of the numeric data that's pulled through in the reports. So in terms of that actual lifetime value and average time between orders, you don't need any of those fields for that. It's just in certain areas it's nice to actually get some real customer data behind it. And then, is there a customer company? Let's have a look. No, so there's not a company as part of the delivery or shipping address, so we can ignore that as well. And then finally, if your account plan supports it, then you can add custom columns here. So there aren't really a massive amount we could use here. So typically you'd have things like payment method would pull through by default to your order export CSV. You don't have that with Shopware. You do have things like the order state ID, but that's not particularly useful, to be honest. And maybe the sales channel ID. If you've got multiple sales channels, you could possibly do a custom column report around that. So you can see the differing lifetime values and so on based on the sales channel ID. But I think, to be honest, there's not a huge amount of information in this CSV that we can use for custom reporting. So I'm just going to leave that blank. And then we'll just give it a name. We'll call it Test Shopware 1. You've got the option here to anonymize the customer data. So if you don't want real names and emails appearing in the report, then you can do that, and that'll just, again, not affect the numeric data, but it'll just basically hide these names and emails and convert them into anonymous values instead. Obviously, these are all test data from the show Reacher on Amazon, which I recently enjoyed, so we don't need to do that. And then finally, the last option is just if you want to overwrite the default project column mappings. So all that means is all these columns that we mapped up here on these drop downs to select, next time I schedule a report against these projects, those column mappings will automatically be pre-populated. So that just saves a little bit of time if you're coming back and doing more reports on the same project, which is obviously, you know, what we want you to do. We want you to keep coming back and getting more fantastic data. So it just saves you having to map those columns again. And then that's it. So that report is now queued. In a couple of minutes, I'll get an email saying the report is generated and I can have a look at that. So that's pretty much everything. Just to recap what we've covered today. So we've talked a little bit about Shopware as a platform. We've been through the admin panel and had a brief demo of that in terms of the various functionality. We've then been through how to export orders as a CSV from Shopware, because there isn't an option on the order screen. So I've guided you through that in terms of where to find that order export option. We've taken a deep dive into the structure of the CSV file to understand how the file's architected and what data that file contains. And then finally, we created a Shopware product on RFM Calc and uploaded the file back into RFM Calc to generate the report. Whew. So I hope that's been useful. Really appreciate you watching. Obviously, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop us a line on the RFM Calc site. And if not, I look forward to seeing you on the next video.